What if I told you that Voldemort, the most feared dark wizard in history, wasn't afraid of death at all? He was afraid of something much worse. Not pain, not defeat, but exposure. The truth is, Dumbledore didn't terrify Voldemort because of his power, but because he could see straight through him. Everything you believed about their rivalry was a lie. And by the end of this video, you'll never see Dumbledore or Voldemort the same way again. The wizarding world wants you to believe that Dumbledore was the ultimate hero, wise, gentle, forgiving, the perfect opposite of Voldemort's cruelty. But what if that opposition was only an illusion, a mirror game, where one manipulated through love and the other through fear? For years we've been told that Voldemort's only fear was death itself, that his obsession with immortality defined his soul. But that's not the full story. Because fear of death is universal. It doesn't make you Voldemort. What made him truly afraid was Dumbledore's understanding of his mind. Think about it. Why did Voldemort never attack Hogwarts while Dumbledore was alive? Why did he avoid direct confrontation for decades? Why did he obsessively send proxies, followers, students, pawns, but never face the old man himself? The answer isn't power. It's psychological domination. Voldemort wasn't afraid of Dumbledore's spells. He was afraid of being seen. Seen for what he really was, a broken child molded by trauma, still craving the approval of a man he secretly admired and despised. The most dangerous duel in wizarding history wasn't fought with wands. It was fought in silence, in the invisible battlefield of the mind. And the psychological evidence buried deep in both men's choices, reveals something horrifying. Dumbledore understood Tom Riddle better than Riddle ever understood himself, and that's exactly why Voldemort feared him more than death. Evidence. The narcissist meets the Emperor. At the core of this fear was a fundamental power imbalance. Voldemort was a textbook narcissist, obsessed with control, incapable of empathy, addicted to validation. Dumbledore, on the other hand, embodied the most dangerous trait to a narcissist: calm empathy. In psychology, narcissists feed off chaos. They thrive when others react emotionally, but Dumbledore never did. He treated Voldemort with chilling composure, even during battle. Remember their duel in the Ministry of Magic? Dumbledore never shouted, never postured. He dismantled Voldemort's fury with silence and precision. To a narcissist, that's not just frustrating, it's annihilating, because it proves one devastating truth: you are not in control. Voldemort's entire identity depended on dominance. Dumbledore refused to give him that satisfaction. He spoke to him not as an enemy, but as a teacher, and that's exactly what Voldemort couldn't tolerate: the reminder that he was still Tom Riddle, the boy who once wanted Dumbledore's approval. To childhood exposure, the original wound. Psychologically, Voldemort's fear of Dumbledore began the day they met. Dumbledore visited him in the orphanage, and within minutes, the old man saw everything: the manipulation, the cruelty, the obsession with trophies and control. For most of his life, Tom Riddle had power over everyone around him. He could charm, deceive, and dominate adults with ease, but not Dumbledore. Dumbledore saw through him instantly. That moment created what psychologists call a trauma loop, a fixed emotional pattern where a narcissist replays early humiliation again and again, trying to reverse it. Voldemort spent his entire life trying to prove that the boy Dumbledore met in that orphanage had evolved into a god. But Dumbledore's calm presence always pulled him back into that original wound, the moment he was seen and judged. That's why Voldemort avoided him. He wasn't avoiding danger, he was avoiding rejection. 3. Gaslighting and psychological warfare. Ironically, it was Dumbledore who used Voldemort's favorite weapon, gaslighting, against him. When Dumbledore refused to publicly fear him, to speak his name with dread, he was controlling the narrative. He stripped Voldemort of myth. Every time Dumbledore called him Tom, he wasn't just being dismissive. He was erasing his god complex. He forced him back into his human identity. something Voldemort considered worse than death. This is classic psychological warfare. To a narcissist, identity control is everything. By renaming him, Dumbledore committed the ultimate act of defiance. He refused to participate in Voldemort's delusion. Think of the confrontation in the Ministry. Dumbledore never used lethal spells. Every action was meant to expose Voldemort's instability, to show the world that the Dark Lord was just a frightened man hiding behind theatrics. Voldemort lost not because of magic, but because he lost control of his own image. And to a narcissist, losing image equals death. 4. The mirror of trauma. But there's a darker layer here, because Dumbledore didn't just defeat Voldemort psychologically, he mirrored him. Both men were shaped by guilt and obsession. Dumbledore's own history with power, the death of his sister, the manipulation of Grindelwald, made him deeply aware of his own capacity for evil. That's why he recognized it so easily in Voldemort, and Voldemort sensed that similarity. He saw himself in Dumbledore's restraint, the same hunger for control, buried under moral discipline. It terrified him, because in that mirror he glimpsed what he could have been, a man who understood his darkness but mastered it. In Jungian psychology, this is called confronting the shadow. Voldemort's greatest fear wasn't death, it was self-recognition, and Dumbledore represented the one person who forced him to face that shadow. Every encounter between them reopened that psychological wound, the idea that Voldemort wasn't special, just broken in a way Dumbledore had already transcended, for the authority complex. Finally, there's the deepest cut, the authority complex. Voldemort's life was defined by rebellion against authority figures, orphanage matrons, Hogwarts teachers, the Ministry. He sought to dominate them all, but Dumbledore represented something he could never conquer, a father figure who refused to engage in his power games. That's why their conversations were always coldly intimate. Dumbledore spoke like a disappointed parent, never an enemy. "It was foolish to come here tonight, Tom," he said, not with hate, but pity. That pity shattered Voldemort more than any curse, because it reminded him that Dumbledore didn't see him as an equal, or even a monster, just as a child who never grew up. To a man obsessed with godhood, that was unbearable. This is why Voldemort feared Dumbledore more than death. Dumbledore stripped him of illusion. Death, Voldemort believed, could be conquered. But psychological exposure, that was eternal. Every time Dumbledore said his name, every calm word, every refusal to fight in anger, he tore away the mask. Voldemort wasn't fighting a wizard. He was fighting the reflection of his own broken humanity. The horrifying truth is this: Voldemort's real fear wasn't death. It was meaninglessness. Dumbledore knew that the only way to destroy a narcissist isn't through violence, but through irrelevance, and he achieved it. Even in death, Dumbledore became the architect of Voldemort's downfall, manipulating events through Harry, Snape, and prophecy. Voldemort thought he'd conquered death, but what he really did was tie his existence to Dumbledore's plan. Every Horcrux he created was a string Dumbledore had already mapped. Every step toward immortality brought him closer to the trap Dumbledore designed. In psychological terms, it's called narcissistic collapse, when the false self implodes under the realization that it never had control. Voldemort's death wasn't just physical, it was existential. When his own curse rebounded, it wasn't a coincidence, it was poetic justice. The man who tried to fragment his soul to escape death was finally killed by the only person who understood his psychology well enough to let him destroy himself. And that's why, in his final moment, Voldemort didn't die screaming in rage. He died in silence. Because deep down he finally understood Dumbledore wasn't his enemy. He was the mirror he could never escape. So how does this change your view of Dumbledore? He wasn't just a wise old mentor. He was a strategist who used deep psychological manipulation to dismantle the most dangerous mind in wizarding history. And Voldemort, despite all his power, was still that frightened boy from the orphanage, trying to prove himself to the one man who never bought his act. The greatest duel in the Harry Potter universe wasn't between good and evil, it was between truth and delusion, and Dumbledore won, not because of power, but because he understood human nature's darkest secret. The ego destroys itself. Share this with another Harry Potter fan. They deserve to know the truth behind Dumbledore's calm smile. And if you thought this was dark, wait until you see what we uncovered about Snape. His obsession with Lily wasn't love, it was psychological dependency. But that is another story.